Hi, my name is Lindsay Lanneman, and today I'm going to be talking about the euphonium. Specifically, talking about what it is and how to write for it. So, the name euphonium comes from an ancient Greek word euphonos, meaning well sounding. It was derived from the ophicleide, which is a predecessor to a tuba. It's kind of like a bass saxophone with a tuba mouthpiece on it. It was really unreliable, though, so when the piston valve was invented in 1818, it kind of led the way for all brass instruments and their families to grow and be refined. But since there was so much production happening, a lot of people kind of claim credit for the invention of the euphonium and the variants of the euphonium, but the actual official credits were given to Ferdinand Sommer of Weimar in 1843. So, what is it? The euphonium is a low brass instrument that looks kind of like a tuba. It can be written either as a non-transposing bass clef instrument, mainly in America, or as a B-flat treble clef instrument. You'll see that a lot in Europe, specifically in brass bands. It tends to have a more mellow and rich tone, and we try to refine it towards a really beautiful, warm sound. The euphonium is most applicable in concert, military, or brass band settings, though they're sometimes seen in orchestral settings. The most notable instance of this would be the tenor tuba part in The Planets by Holst. They're also sometimes used as a replacement for the ophicleide part, although not very often. So let's talk about the baritone versus the euphonium. The baritone and the euphonium are really closely related, but there are some major differences. As you can see in the picture here, the one on the left is the baritone and the one on the right is a euphonium. The euphonium has a conical bore, which means that the tubing gets bigger as the instrument gets longer, and the baritones have a cylindrical bore, which means that the tubing pretty much stays the same up until the bell, where it flares out really big. Other than that, the euphonium is a little bit larger than the baritone as well, which provides for a more deep, rich, mellow sound. So why is there so much confusion? Well, there are a lot of reasons for the misidentification between the two. One of the biggest ones would probably be that names for the euphonium on scores in foreign languages tend to be a little misleading. For example, in Italian, it could be called the baritono, and in German, it could be called the baritone. And that might have a little bit more influence in terms of American misguidance because as the euphonium was really being developed and brought into light, that's when a lot of German immigrants were coming to America and the gap of language kind of held over. Additionally, the American marching baritone that was used in American marching bands in the late 20th century mainly is a hybrid between a classic baritone and a euphonium, but it was kind of just universally labeled as a baritone by both band directors and composers alike. Another source of confusion could come from drum and bugle corps when they introduced their bass baritones, which are really just marching euphoniums now, but they were introduced as separate entities, but were still called baritones technically. More specifically, how to write for the euphonium. The euphonium has a pretty big range, actually. The total playable range ranges from about B flat 1 to E5, but there's a little bit of room on either side for experienced pros. I'd say comfortable, decent playing range would be anywhere between E2 and B flat 4, although it really depends on the player and what they're comfortable with. And finally, I'd say a good range to have a beginner player start with is pretty much anywhere in the staff, about G2 to C4-ish. So the euphonium is kind of known as the jack of all trades in band instruments. It's known for its beautiful mellow sound, which provides great opportunities for lyrical spotlights and solos. And actually, John Philip Sousa loved writing for the euphonium and often gave us main melodies throughout his entire pieces. So yeah, there's a pretty basic rundown on the euphonium. It's really an underrated instrument. Not a lot of people know what it is or what it can do, and I really hope that this presentation at least helped you appreciate it a little bit more.